Did you know that in ancient China, a criminal could be sentenced to death by 1,000 cuts? This gruesome punishment involved making 1,000 cuts on the body until death occurred. It's a chilling testament to the lengths that justice, or perhaps vengeance, could reach in historic Chinese society. Even today, some of the punishments meted out can seem unthinkable to those of us in the Western world. Let's dive into the history and progression of punishments in China and prepare to be astounded. In ancient China, punishments were severe, brutal, and often public. They were designed not only to punish but to humiliate and deter others from committing similar crimes. One of the most feared forms of punishment was death by 1,000 cuts, also known as lingqi. This method was a slow, torturous execution where the convicted person was subjected to a series of small cuts all over their body, each one drawing a tiny amount of blood. The process was drawn out, sometimes over days, until the person finally succumbed to their injuries. It was a punishment reserved for the most heinous crimes, a public spectacle designed to instill fear and compliance in the populace. Another method of punishment was the 5 punishments. These were a set of corporal punishments meted out for various crimes. The 5 were beating with a light bamboo, beating with a heavier stick, exile to a distant land, mutilation, and death. These were often public affairs where the convicted person was paraded in front of a crowd, their punishment a spectacle for all to see. Then there was the kang. This was a form of public humiliation where the convicted person was forced to wear a heavy wooden collar, often for months at a time. The kang restricted movement and made it impossible for the person to feed or dress themselves. They were left to the mercy of the public, who could choose to feed them or not. It was a punishment that stripped the person of their dignity, leaving them a spectacle of shame and disgrace. And yet, while these punishments were incredibly severe, they were not permanent fixtures. As society evolved, so did the methods of punishment. The brutal physical punishments of ancient times gave way to more sophisticated forms of social control and rehabilitation. But the memory of these ancient punishments, the fear they instilled, still echoes through the ages. While these punishments were incredibly harsh, they were not permanent fixtures. As society evolved, so did the methods of punishment. The Imperial era saw a shift in Chinese punishments. While still harsh, there was a move towards reform and rehabilitation. This was a time when China's punitive measures began to evolve, taking on a form that was more focused on rehabilitation and reformation than sheer brutality. One of the key punishments during this time was penal servitude. This was a form of punishment where the convicted was sentenced to hard labor, often in harsh conditions. It was a punishment designed not only to penalize but also to reform the offender. The goal was to instill a sense of discipline and hard work, hopefully leading to a change in behavior. Exile was another commonly used punishment. Convicts were banished from their home region, forced to live in remote areas far from civilization. This form of punishment was not just about physical hardship, but also a psychological one, as the convicts were cut off from their families and communities. The isolation was intended to lead to self-reflection and ultimately, reformation. A significant reform introduced during the Imperial era was yanci, a form of reform through labor. It was an approach that sought to rehabilitate offenders through hard work and discipline. The idea was to provide the convicts with useful skills that they could use once they had served their sentence, helping them reintegrate into society. The Imperial era also saw the implementation of the Great Qing Legal Code, a comprehensive set of laws that governed every aspect of life. It was a significant step forward in creating a more organized and systematic legal system, and, while it still contained severe punishments, it also emphasized fairness and justice. The Imperial era, with its emphasis on reform, was a stepping stone to the modern Chinese legal system. It marked a shift from mindless brutality to a more thoughtful approach, one that sought to reform and rehabilitate rather than merely punish. It was a time of change, a time of evolution, a time of progress, and while the punishments were still severe, they were no longer mindless. They were a reflection of a society that was striving towards justice and reform. Modern China has seen significant legal reform, with the implementation of a formal legal code and the abolition of many traditional punishments. This shift started in the mid-20th century, as China sought to modernize its legal system, adopting a more standardized approach to law and order. In the heart of this legal metamorphosis is the current criminal justice system, which is based on written laws and regulations. Unlike the arbitrary and often brutal methods of the past, the modern system is designed to protect the rights of individuals while maintaining social order. One aspect that sparked global attention is the use of the death penalty. China remains one of the few countries in the world which still employs capital punishment, albeit for a significantly reduced number of crimes compared to the past. Today, it's reserved for the most severe offenses, such as murder, drug trafficking, and corruption, among others. The use of capital punishment is a contentious issue, stirring heated debates both within and outside China's borders. Another controversial practice is the re-education through labor system. Introduced in the 1950s, this system allowed for administrative detentions without trial, primarily used as a tool against political dissidents and minor offenders. Detainees were often subjected to hard labor and ideological education. However, in 2013, China announced plans to abolish this system, marking a significant shift in its approach to punishment. Yet, despite these reforms, concerns persist about the fairness and transparency of China's legal system. Critics argue that confessions obtained through torture are still admissible in court, and there's an over-reliance on the death penalty. However, it's undeniable that the country has made strides towards legal reform. The transition from a system characterized by brutal and arbitrary punishments to one based more on written laws and regulations is a significant step forward. Modern China's punishments, while still severe, are more in line with international norms. It's a journey that's far from over as China continues to grapple with the balance between maintaining social order and upholding individual rights. Despite the evolution of Chinese punishments, there are still practices that draw international criticism and scrutiny. Let's start with the infamous dead man's bed. This is a form of sleep deprivation where detainees are restrained to a metal bed frame in a painful, stretched-out position. They are forced to remain in this horrifying state for days on end with no reprieve. This physical and psychological torture method has been widely condemned by human rights organizations worldwide. Next, we delve into the controversial topic of organ harvesting. China has repeatedly been accused of forcibly removing organs from prisoners, particularly those from the Falun Gong religious group. The Chinese government claims to have stopped using organs from executed prisoners in 2015. However, international skepticism persists, fueled by a lack of transparency and ongoing reports of organ trafficking. Let's not forget about the treatment of political dissidents. China has a long history of suppressing free speech and political opposition. Dissidents are often subjected to harsh punishments, including lengthy prison sentences, forced labor, or even the death penalty. This has led to an ongoing dialogue about human rights and the freedom of expression within the country. In the Xinjiang region, there are reports of mass internment camps housing as many as 1 million Uyghur Muslims. The Chinese government insists these are vocational training centers aimed at stamping out extremism. However, survivors tell a different story of forced labor, cultural assimilation, and even torture. China's criminal justice system remains a hotbed of controversy, with allegations of forced confessions, lack of legal representation, and unfair trials. Critics argue that the death penalty is often used as a political tool rather than a mechanism of justice. These practices continue to stir debate and controversy, both within China and globally. It's a complex issue with cultural, political, and human rights dimensions. As we move forward, the world watches and waits to see how China will navigate its place on the global stage in the face of such scrutiny. The journey through Chinese punishments reveals a unique blend of cultural, historical, and political influences. A journey that is as fascinating as it is disconcerting. The Chinese penal system is a testament to the country's intricate history and its enduring cultural nuances. The severity of these punishments, whether ancient or modern, underscores a deeply rooted societal commitment to maintaining order and discipline. From the blood-curdling death by 1,000 cuts of ancient times, an execution method involving a slow and painful demise, to the much-debated dead man's bed of today's prisons, the gravity of these punitive measures is undeniable. In ancient China, the brutal punishments were not just a reflection of the era's harsh realities, but also an embodiment of its complex social hierarchy. Moving into the Imperial era, we witnessed a shift in perspective, with the emergence of more nuanced, albeit still severe, forms of punishment. The era of legal reform in modern China brought with it a wave of changes, yet the essence of severity and the stamp of uniqueness in their punishments remained intact. Even today, amidst global scrutiny and calls for reform, controversial practices continue. underscoring the deeply ingrained nature of these punitive measures. From death by 1,000 cuts to the dead man's bed, the evolution of Chinese punishments provides a unique and sometimes unsettling glimpse into the country's history and culture.